Good afternoon, everybody. We're going to try to be on time today. We're 1 minute off. So welcome. Today is, what is today? February 9th. We are happy to have you here today. We are going to start with the Chesapeake Bay overview, and we are going to hear from our analyst, Andrew Gray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll now present the Chesapeake Bay Overview Fiscal 2027 Budget Analysis. The overall picture for Chesapeake Bay Restoration is a total maximum daily load with watershed implementation plans, sort of like a plan to get to that total maximum daily load. And then there were milestones, 2-year milestones, to actually kind of keep track of progress along the way. On page 14, Exhibit 5 shows the change in the nitrogen loads for Maryland between 2023 and 2024. It's around 1.9 million pounds. And obviously this is not quite as far as we'd like to be, and it's gonna be a little bit challenging to kind of get where we need to go as well. It looks like the 2025 restoration goal will not be met by Maryland nor by the other states as a whole either, primarily because of Pennsylvania's loading. Turning now to page 21, we'll go to the first issue. This one concerns overall Chesapeake Bay restoration funding. So it's gonna be broken down into a couple of categories of funding. The first one we'll talk about here is Chesapeake Bay Restoration overall funding, shown on page 22. Exhibit 9. So this is the big picture. So $113.2 million change between fiscal 2026 and fiscal 2027. And the primary reasons for those changes are reflected actually on the next page. The $48.6 million change for Program Open Space Rural Legacy in the Maryland Agricultural Land Preservation Foundation is due to the difference in transfer taxes. So we're seeing an increase in the revenue estimate. We're also seeing less money being accounted for as an underattainment from 2 years prior, where we actually got fairly close to our estimate. If we'd gotten a lot lower than our estimate, we'd have an underattainment applied to fiscal 2027, and that funding is applied to the land preservation programs. There's an increase of about $27.6 million in special funds for the State Highway Administration's total maximum daily load compliance program primarily. There's a $23.6 million increase from Maryland Department of the Environment, primarily due to a $27.2 million increase for the Water Quality Revolving Loan Fund. And then finally, you have $10.6 million increase, primarily due to an $8 million increase in general obligation bonds for the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program. Somebody needs to fix that. Okay, so on page 25, we have the second component of funding to Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bay's 2010 Trust Fund, planned expenditures. So this is Exhibit 10, and one of the things to consider here is that the 2010 Trust Fund, as we call it, has been used quite recently for operating expenses. And its expenses from the fund are above its revenues, and therefore that's bringing the balance down. So you see at the top of page 25, the starting balance goes from $47.4 million in 2025 to $23.2 million in 2027. So that's obviously not a sustainable trend. We'll talk a little bit more about that at the very bottom of this page, where it says the competitive grant program for the Department of Natural Resources. You look on the far right-hand side, it's a $12.7 million decrease between the 2 years for that purpose. And one of the reasons why the administration has taken that reduction is to allow for it to still try to use the majority of the $10.5 million it's allowed to use for operating expenses. So only bringing that down by $1 million, which is shown on the next page. So the basic idea is try to do as much as we can in the current policy arena, but also use the fund for defraying some of our operating costs as well. And then on page 26, you see that change in the overall funding is $14.1 million, primarily due to that competitive grant program decrease in funding. The Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting this information again, and that'll be in the Department of Natural Resources operating budget analysis. Moving now to page 27, we go to the second issue. This concerns the whole Watershed Act implementation. So it's chapters 558 and 559, 2024. So establish the whole watershed restoration partnership. We now have 5 watersheds that have been selected, and they're reflected on the next page. In Exhibit 11. So it's in Antietam Creek, Baltimore Harbor, Upper Choptank, Newport Bay, and Severn River. One of the things that DLS noticed when looking at this list is that almost all of the watersheds, 3 of the 5, do have agriculture as a predominant sector. But if you look at the projects, which are shown on pages 29 through 31, there are very few projects, there's actually just one that's explicitly targeted to agriculture. And then if you look on page 32, Exhibit 13 shows that breakdown and shows that, you know, there's a lot of stream restoration work on the far right, then stormwater management, but then agricultural conservation is on the third to lowest funded program or funded segment of the work in fiscal 2026. And that's something that DLS would like to have the administration comment on due to the fact that 3 of the 5 watersheds do have a primary focus on agriculture. And also just like to have the administration comment on the overall funding for the whole watershed fund in fiscal 2026 and fiscal 2027, because it's not as clear in the budget, it's not laid out explicitly in that way. It's a lot of programs are within their own funds, but they're being used for the purpose of the whole watershed fund. Therefore, you don't get a clear picture of exactly what money is being used for the whole watershed fund purposes. So DLS is recommended to comment on there, including the part about the Maryland Department of Agriculture's role, and then also about long-term maintenance funding for projects as well, whether that be provided. DLS also recommends that DNR, in cooperation with the other partner-based agencies, submit a report with the fiscal 2028 allowance, talking about the whole watershed fund. On the bottom of page 33 is the 3rd issue. This concerns the revised Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. So it was signed December 2nd, 2025. It is a consolidated number of goals and outcomes and pushes out the overall restoration target to 2040. So it's obviously more time to do that work, kind of acknowledgement that it's gonna be a little bit more difficult to get to where we wanna go based on the additional things that need to be done due to climate change and to model changes. DLS recommends the administration brief the committees on the policy implications of pushing out the restoration requirement to 2040 and what this means for the overall Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. And on page 34, you have the historical and projected Chesapeake Bay restoration spending report, which is requested every year to get a kind of feeling for where Chesapeake Bay restoration is. So the report notes for this current year, the likelihood of meeting the 2025 deadline is definitely narrowed in terms of the possibilities for that. It's likely not going to happen. There is some hope in terms of the work that's being done, the Governor Executive Order, and also the whole Watershed Act, the Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan, Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming Program are all opportunities to kind of accelerate the work that we're doing. The post-2025 uncommitted additional loads will be very challenging, though. It's 1.5 million additional pounds due primarily to landscape and population changes. And you also have the water quality monitoring trends, which look fairly good at this point. And finally, there's the enhanced nutrient removal refinement. So Bay Restoration Fund has been providing funding since, well, it was originally put into statute in 2004, and has been upgrading our wastewater treatment plants to enhance nutrient removal technology since that time. And so we have upgraded 66 of the 67 major wastewater treatment plants. We're finding that after 20 years, those plants are now basically in need of additional work. So the idea is that the administration would like to keep the current Bay Restoration Fund fee, which is around $60 per year for most households, in order to be able to fund the approximately $900 million cost of bringing those additional plants up to keeping them at standard and hopefully actually bringing them even lower in terms of the overall loading. So that would be on page 35, the 2.85 milligrams per liter nitrogen would be the ideal. So not only to keep the plants in good working operation, but actually get them to an even better stage. Looking forward, DLS has noted that there are a couple things might be worthwhile reconsidering at this point, given the fact that we're kind of doing a reset with the 2040 deadline. The first one there in the middle of page 35 is the idea of a regional financing authority. So this was an idea that came about many years ago, like 2004 or 5 time period. And the idea was pool the resources across all the different states and then fund the most cost-effective practices wherever they might be. So that didn't actually happen. We did not actually go with that particular route for financing the Chesapeake Bay restoration, although we have the Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan, which is sort of a similar idea to how that original regional financing authority was supposed to work. There's also the possibility for an impervious surface fee. So that was something that was considered way back when we were looking at the Chesapeake and Atlantic Coastal Bays 2010 Trust Fund. So it was not agreed upon at that time, but it did provide an interesting way to bring in both revenue and also encourage behavior change, because if it's more costly to do development with impervious surface, like a larger number of impervious surfaces, that might encourage lower impervious surface impacts. Also, chapters 237, 238 of 2022 had a natural capital accounting component. There was a task force to look at that, but it doesn't look like there's anything that's happened since then in terms of looking at not just what the regular assets are for local governments, but also looking at your natural capital assets as well. The idea is if you value those assets, those natural capital assets, then when you actually impinge upon them in some way, then the value goes down, and then that would show up on your books, and then therefore be a trigger to kind of make sure that you're not doing that. Also, on page 36, you have farmer engagement. So the administration is working on the Leaders in Environmentally Engaged Farming program, sort of a top-down lead, kind of an architectural plan for getting farmers recognized for both environmental and also ambassadorial purposes. So when they're doing the kind of combined aspects of being good stewards of the land for the purposes of the bay, and also good stewards of agriculture in general. But one consideration here is that that is a very top-down approach, that there are other approaches. One of them is the producer-led bundling agricultural practices project concept, which is being explored by Envision Chop Tank as part of the Upper Chop Tank Watersheds work, as part of a whole watershed fund. The idea there is to really work with farmers to see, kind of, in a sense, get them to work with each other to find out what's best for their operations, and then what's best for their operations, and then hopefully help out with the bay as well. That's something to kind of consider. And then finally, there's the septic system regulation. This is something that was in place during the O'Malley administration, and this was basically no septic systems outside of the critical area. But then, no, sorry, inside the critical area, inside the critical area. But that was rescinded. So DLS recommends the administration comment on the plan for meeting the new 2040 Chesapeake Bay restoration requirement, the implications of that requirement for funding, and then some of the additional things that are noted on that page, including DLS recommends having committee narrative adopting a report from the agencies on the historical and projected Chesapeake Bay spending, as was done this year for next year's budget as well. Then on page 37 is the final issue. There's a Conowingo Dam Watershed Implementation Plan, Relicensing and Settlement Agreement. So the Conowingo Dam is a peaking hydroelectric facility on the Susquehanna River. It is has a lot of sediment and nutrients behind it. And then the consideration is, how do you address that? Because every time there's a big storm, there's a scour, and that pulls the nutrients out from behind the bay and sends them into the outside, but behind the impoundment behind the dam into the Chesapeake Bay. So that's obviously a major consideration. So there's a Conowingo Dam Watershed Implementation Plan. 6.75 million pounds of nitrogen per year need to be reduced. Maryland has contributed $25 million towards that effort, and that funding has been put into 2 RFPs. One RFP has actually gone to 4 projects, and they've been selected. They were selected last year. And the second RFP is actually is ready to go, it looks, in terms of the projects. We just haven't seen the full budget amendment process to actually transfer the money to then make sure that that money is available to MDE, to then provide the Susquehanna River Basin Commission, who actually does the kind of the allocation of funding. Conowingo Dam Relicensing and Settlement Agreement is discussed on page 38. So one of the considerations for the Conowingo Dam was a 50-year relicensing that was considered, and there was an actual proposal on October 29, 2019 that would create a settlement agreement between MDE and Constellation that would be for a 50-year license term. And as part of that settlement, $200 million would be provided over 50 years for environmental purposes to help out with the Chesapeake Bay restoration effort. That was challenged in courts, and we now have a new agreement, which was announced on October 2nd, 2025. And that agreement paves the way for a $340 million settlement for providing for Chesapeake Bay restoration purpose, so $140 million increase. On page 1440, exhibit 14, you see that $6.3 million of the money that's already been received for the old settlement, the $200 million settlement, will be retained by the administration for the purposes noted here. And then the new components of the settlement agreement are reflected on the bottom of page 40 in Exhibit 15. So you're seeing there the $87.6 million for water quality and resilience, and other purposes noted. In the middle of the page, or the middle of that exhibit, I'd just like to point out that there is $18.7 million is still committed to the idea of dredging. And the overall information that was provided in the governor's press release didn't account for the entire $340 million. It only accounted for $244.8 million. Therefore, DLS recommends the administration comment on kind of what's going on with the Conowingo Watershed Implementation Plan in terms of the other states and their provision of funding, and whether the funding is being used the way the budget committees had recommended a couple of years ago for 15-year beneficial life. Also, to comment on what is known about the responses to the round 2 request for proposals for that Susquehanna River Basin Commission competitive funding, and to comment on the next steps for the Conowingo Dam water quality certification relicensing. So we know that there's a settlement agreement in place, but we haven't heard anything from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. We'd like to find out more about that as well, and about what's happening with dredging and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers Conowingo Reservoir Modeling Study. Now, the big kind of reveal, this agency is non-budgeted. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Andrew? No? Okay, thank you. I'd like to call up Secretary Kurtz. Yes, please come up.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for having us. For the record, Secretary Kurtz of Department of Natural Resources. And apologies, a little scattered here with the new baby. So I really appreciate you all having this conversation today, and Mr. Gray, appreciate the detailed analysis of the Chesapeake Bay budget. You have our written remarks, so I'm not going to get into a lot of what we put down there. We concur with all of the reporting, but wanted to start with just a couple high-level comments that address many of the questions here related to the Bay Agreement and to the whole Watershed Act. At the end of the day, the Bay Agreement really does frame the restoration work across the region. The Bay Agreement is signed by the 6 Bay states plus the District of Columbia, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, which your colleagues sit on, and the federal government, which EPA serves as the lead agency for the feds. And so what this agreement does is we all voluntarily agree to do the things that we put into the agreement. And the agreement had the goal and the deadline of 2025. There is one regulatory piece, the total maximum daily load, which is overseen by the EPA with their Clean Water Act authority. Everything else in that agreement is stuff that we agree, using the best available science, is what we need to do to holistically restore the Bay. And so what we did, and what was signed, well, signed is I guess the improper term, what was ratified at the end of last year was revising that agreement. So we went in, and over 2 years, we deep dove every single outcome, every single goal, and we asked ourselves, is this serving the people of the region? Is this restoring the Chesapeake Bay? And if not, what do we need to do to ensure that it does? And so we evaluated every goal, every outcome, every metric. And what we decided too was also that it was very difficult to understand. We had 10 goals, 31 outcomes. We have brought that into 4 goals, 21 outcomes. So it really lands, I think, in a much easier way to communicate, but it still goes down to that very specific metric level. When we think about this new target date of 2040, that does not mean that we are pushing all the work out to 2040. We looked at all of the goals that we met. The ones that we fell behind on, we tried to figure out exactly why we did that. And then we created new goals. And those goals have an interim date of 2033. But each one of them within the actual outcome have metrics that are yearly, which we've never done before. So that allows us to more effectively track progress on each one of these goals. And we also really leaned into net impacts. A good example of this, when you think about the 2014 agreement, was the wetland goal, 85,000 acres across the watershed, incredible opportunity for us to restore wetlands. We did not think about that as a net goal. So we could have restored 85,000 wetlands, bulldozed 185,000 acres of wetlands, and called it done, success, right? And so we tweaked that and we changed that, so that's a net goal. It incentivizes things like protection of wetlands, not just restoration. So that's just one example of an outcome that we significantly refined. So again, this is an agreement that is predicated around voluntary action in our jurisdictions. There's a reason that Maryland's a leader. This is where I say thank you to all of you and to your former colleagues. I mean, going back to 1969, you all were putting in place dedicated funding streams. Maybe not you all personally, yes, but your colleagues that frankly other states don't have. So when we see the progress or the lack thereof in other states, one of the things that we've been beating the drum on is dedicated funding sources. Now, one of the things I think we've been most excited about is the funding for voluntary ag cost share programs that has now emerged in Pennsylvania and Virginia to follow the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program model. Over the past 2 years, there has been more money spent in the ag space than in the history of the Bay Agreement over a 2-year period, similar 2-year period. So very excited to see those investments. We should be seeing that really look a lot better in terms of what we're seeing from the monitoring in places like the Susquehanna. There will be a bit of a delay in that. We know from the CESA report that those delays and those gaps are things that we need to build into the system. Another important part of this is the actual TMDL. That is going to be recalculated. So 2028 is when the new model will come out. So we wrote that to say, okay, everybody keep the pedal on the metal for the 25 goals for your pollution diet, understanding that in 28, 29, we're going to get a new pollution diet, and then taking a 10-year period to be able to achieve that, which is the regular cadence we've had in the Bay Agreement. So the policies that we have in place here and our budget in Maryland, we feel strongly allows us to be successful with what we have moving forward. And Mr. Gray touched on this by refining our programs, whether that be LEAF, the whole Watershed Act, the Bay Restoration Fund, continuing that program. You know, that's how we've been successful. We feel confident that we will be funded to be successful moving forward by making these programmatic and policy tweaks. That leads directly into the whole Watershed Act. So I wanted to touch on the point that Mr. Gray made about the funding. Each one of those fund sources is set up with different statutory requirements. The Bay Restoration Fund, the Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund, we can forward fund those. So you'll see $5 million out of the Bay Restoration or out of the Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund for the whole Watershed Act this year. We can do that, you know, in the fiscal years, actually create that carve out. Same thing with the Waterway Improvement Fund, which goes to the monitoring program. So that's $1.25 million. MDE can also do that with the Bay Restoration Fund. Where it gets a little bit trickier for us is the fund sources for the Department of Agriculture, as Mr. Gray touched on. So the Maryland Agricultural Cost Share Program really is driven by working in communities and helping build projects that benefit the farmer and benefit the environment. And so for the whole Watershed Act, we could look and project water quality improvements for the Bay Restoration Fund and the Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund projects and what qualifies, not the same in the ag space. So what Secretary Addix and his team have done is they've really built that grassroots network, working with the soil conservation districts. So now that we've identified the areas, now we'll go ahead and start building out those actual projects. So by having that targeted area, it allows them to work there. So while it might not look like we have put money in the budget specifically for whole Watershed Act in the ag space, we have put together all we need to actually then fund and find and develop projects there. So it's a little bit of a different approach in the ag space, but that's due just the statutory requirements of the funding source. And again, we are happy to submit a report on that as recommended by DLS. When it comes to whole Watershed Act as well, we're in a really good space. We're stepping into implementation now across the 5 watersheds. And I think the thing we're most excited about is to see how the whole Watershed Act has actually created a significant amount of leverage. We're basically matching 1-for-1 state dollars with nonprofit local dollars to really boost that rate of return. And so we're continuing to work on those implementation of those projects and set up that monitoring protocol so that we can demonstrate success and learn from what is a pilot to see if this is really how we need to kind of overhaul and make more significant policy decisions about maybe the Atlantic Coastal Bays Trust Fund moving forward. So that's just some high-level points that we wanted to make as it pertains to the findings, and we're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Why don't we, if people are okay, you want to hold questions until the end, until everybody is finished with their presentation, and then, okay, great. Secretary McElwain.
What? Sorry, I think I did it for everyone. Mm-hmm. So yeah, we just just make
overarching
you're
just there
comments.
For questions.
Yeah, right.
Me too.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. All right, then go ahead, Senator Rosenpope.
Thank you. How are things going with the Trump administration with the Chesapeake Bay program?
So we have brand new leadership at the Chesapeake Bay program now, and so we've been working to continue to build out those relationships. One thing that we've been really staying on top of is the funding decisions, and we've seen that top line number come out. We're in a very good place. We're very appreciative of that. Now the real question is how they put that into practice. And what I mean by that is, are they still funding our advisory committees? Are they still funding the technical support that we need in the Bay program? And those funding decisions haven't been made yet, but I think that's a place where we're doing a significant amount of advocacy. We're also closely watching the budgets of the other agencies that are part of the Bay program. USGF's incredibly important for monitoring, just as one example. And I think what we're seeing in what our concerns lie, not necessarily with the formal Bay program funding, but the funding of the associated federal agencies. That's an area that we think is going to cause some real heartburn moving forward.
I'd really like a little more detail. I mean, so compared to where we were a year and 3 months ago, let's say, just take that out of the air. I mean, is our support and funding from the federal government materially down, only down to a minor extent, or much better than it was before? That's what I'm trying to get a feel for.
Yeah, so the Bay program itself, we don't have the IRA and the IIJA funding, so it is coming down, but it's coming down to what we had previously authorized, which was the 92, and actually I think it was just plussed up to 96 million because of our representation in Congress. So the Bay program function, not seeing that material change. Where we are seeing the material change is in operating budgets for the other agencies. And so, that hasn't fully hit the ground yet, but cutting a significant number of jobs at NOAA and at USGS is going to materially impact our understanding of the Bay and our ability to frankly get a lot more technical support from the federal government, as well as to do things like monitoring. We rely on the USGS for a lot of monitoring information. We have our own monitoring program. We were concerned about this last year. We've changed some of our authorities to be able to do more monitoring in partnership with local governments and nonprofits, things like that. But I do think we're going to really start feeling the impacts of that because of the operating cuts over the coming months into the next year.
Thank you. Do you, the other secretaries, want to make comments on that?
Same. Nope.
We've been
Thank you.
flat.
Okay. Flat. And,
Same.
gotcha.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Senator Lewis Young.
Thank you. I'd like to go back to the conversation we had about the decrease in funding on page 26, the $14.1 million reduction. Could you elaborate on that and specifically how that might affect attainment of your goals?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. So what we did when we looked at that fund source was we looked at where we could accommodate the biggest reduction because over the past several years, we put more money out through our federal programs onto the ground. And so what we have right now in the trust fund, in terms of what we've been able to fund, we've been bringing in a lot of federal funds. We're still, frankly, spending that down in previous fiscal years. And so we felt comfortable that we could basically absorb that cut in the competitive grant program. This allows our staff, too, to be able to then actually shift to do more work on state lands where we have additional capacity from a fiscal perspective. So we felt that was the strongest place to be able to take a cut without having any material impact on the restoration effort. Yep.
Okay, that was the key part of the question. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Senator Solling.
Thank you for all the information, secretaries, and I appreciate that. One of the problems that we've had for a long period of time is cooperation from the other states with Susquehanna, and I'm hoping we're in a better place because it just seems that some of the problems that we've had with the farming and everything that's been coming down in Chesapeake. Can you just tell us just briefly how that is going?
Yeah, so I think, and I'd point directly to empirical data. The UMSI's report card shows one of the biggest improvements in the Susquehanna over their measurement periods. And that is directly related to what we discussed before, which is the funding of that agricultural cost share program in Pennsylvania. They've also been funding a stream delisting program, which I think is a different way to communicate about the Bay, right? They're not saying this is a Chesapeake Bay program. They're saying this is an Adams County, Pennsylvania program, right? And so what they're doing is they're encouraging people to restore waterways that flow into the Susquehanna, into the Bay. they're getting that benefit for their communities. They're seeing improvements they do a lot more, trout, fly fishing, things like that, they're ecotourism pieces, and we're benefiting downstream from water quality improvements. Anytime we do these, and Secretary Addix, I know you know this better than I do, but anytime we do these agricultural BMP implementation, there is a bit of a time lag until you really start to see that improve, right? If you plant a plant, you're not harvesting that tomato tomorrow, so you have to let those buffers grow in, those kind of things. So we expect to see that only continue because they've made that investment. We are continuing to work with our partners and through many of your colleagues at the Bay Commission to ensure that the other states are continuing to fund those programs. The difference with our programs is they're in statute, long-term policies, not necessarily the case for Pennsylvania, although Virginia has been doing more of those long-term dedicated funding sources. So I think, where we sit today and looking across the Bay program, they have made improvements in Pennsylvania. We're confident they're going to continue to see that. And I do think same thing in Virginia. I think they learned a lot from our Bay Restoration Fund and the great work MDE has done in uplifting our wastewater treatment, and they're doing more of that in a similar fashion in those two states. So we are seeing, and the data bears that out from UMCs, that we are seeing improvements for the Susquehanna. But again, they're at 38% of their goal for nitrogen. They still have a long way to go.
Yeah, so I knew that was ongoing, but it's good to know that. One of the things that was brought out, the analysis was impervious surface fees that I think, gave to the locals to have more responsibility in that. I mean, from what I'm being told, past years, that's been going very well. Is there still a problem there, or are we okay?
I don't know if we passed impervious surface fees, the ones that were debated before, or
Yes.
debated. Okay, are those in?
Yes, I'm looking at Lee, he's not looking.
Can you make comment?
Yeah, please.
Sure, Lee Curry, Director of the Water and Science Administration at MDE. Some jurisdictions, the way the law is set up, some jurisdictions can adopt them. If they don't adopt them, that they have to show that they have enough money to support the restoration required and the MS4 permits. Some use them, some don't. But the ones that use them, they've been effective for restoration projects. Right now, all those jurisdictions are in compliance with their MS4.
That's what I thought. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Secretary Kurtz, you mentioned you have now annual goals. You're not just waiting till 2040. How transparent are you? Do you have any sort of dashboard on your?
Yep, so all of that is tracked through the Bay program. We're still going through those final revisions, and they're also then going to be discussed. Each goal has a goal implementation team, so they track it as well. We also then have our Science Technical Advisory Committee, so they're watching it as well, which is great. So it's not just state agencies and government that's part of the partnership. It's a wide range of other entities. So yeah, that is going to be well tracked. One of the reasons we went to the 4 goals in 21 and outcomes is so it's frankly easier to track and easier to communicate. But that's an explicit goal and outcome for this new agreement, is that people will be able to see where we are starting to fall behind. So it's not, having to wade through a 2-year milestone report that's incredibly technical, but just did we get the 180 acres this year? Did we get the 15 new access points this year? Just to help us also be held accountable.
Okay, thank you. One of the other things that I think you were asked to comment on were some of the recommendations from DLS, and I wonder if you might be able to do that, the Regional Financing Authority, et cetera.
Sure, as it pertains to Conowingo or just?
Just in general.
Okay.
And the recommendations on page 35.
35. Yep. So I'll start with recommending the kind of the policy implications of the 2040. So since it is over the next 15 years, and I think this is where we looked at our dedicated funding sources and we evaluated the types of projects that would be going into these 2040 goals. We feel very strongly that the policy is not going to change necessarily the amount of funding that's needed, that we're confident that the fund sources we have set up through the trust fund, Bay Restoration Fund, these dedicated funding sources, program open space, will allow us to meet our goals. There's a couple of especially the oyster space. Before, that was really focused on federal capital dollars. We recognize that that is probably not going to continue. And so we changed what that outcome is. That outcome is more about oyster habitat than just tributary scale restoration. So we have an acreage goal, again, quantitative, but it's qualitatively different. So we can work with our commercial watermen, we can work with the aquaculture community, et cetera, to get more actual abundance of oysters without it having to just be capitally invested in protected sanctuaries. So when we look at this, our strong belief from doing that analysis is that our funding sources and our policies in place give us the framework to be successful for 2040. I will say we're learning things in whole watershed and in LEAF that could need us to tweak some of these programs from an implementation perspective. But where we sit today and how we provided feedback to that Bay Agreement was explicitly directed at ensuring that we would be able to meet the 2040 goals writ large across the program in terms of Maryland's piece of that. It is a little bit tricky, I will say, because we don't break it up and say like each state outside of the pollution diet, you're responsible for X or Y. A good example of that is Maryland met over a third of the land protection goal for the entire partnership in the previous time period. That's driven by statute, but it's just as much driven by the fact that we have these long-term dedicated funding streams. So for that recommendation, I think commenting there, we do feel strongly that we have the policy framework in place and the funding sources to be successful for 2040. As it pertains to the Bay Restoration Fund, I don't know, Secretary, if you want to talk about the need for continuing.
Yes, so I know you mentioned it, Andrew. Thank you for your analysis speaking on this part. But yes, we've made so much progress in terms of upgrading the wastewater treatment plants and just all the restoration efforts using the Bay Restoration Fund. And we really, I plan to speak with the General Assembly and legislators this year and next year so that that fund remains where it is. Because we've made so much progress and we don't want to see that progress go backwards. We want to just continue to do what we're doing. We're also utilizing the funding that we have as best we can. We have the Pay for Success program. We plan to continue to use that. So it's really important that, in terms of the Bay Restoration Fund, that we are able to keep that funding as much as we can.
And Secretary, do you want to comment on LEAF for the?
Sure. Just talk briefly on LEAF. First, a note of gratitude for this committee's support of our leaders in environmentally engaged farming program. It's been a bit of a buildup. We are launching a pilot this spring with a group of farmers just to help us refine and tool up the program. It is meant to be a fundamental change in how we track conservation, how we incentivize conservation, and we're very excited about it. It does dovetail perfectly in with the Whole Watershed Act. And I did want to make one comment about, now that I have the microphone, about one of the prior comments from DLS about our Maryland Ag cost share being separately funded and our Maryland Ag land preservation being separately funded, and how does it sync with Whole Watershed. It syncs very, very well. There's a ton of synergy between those programs, but also there's a reality that not all of the Whole Watershed Act sites that have been selected will have preservation components or ag cost share components, but when they do, the programs align perfectly.
And then in terms of the reports, we do concur with the DLS and we'll continue to provide those reports on Chesapeake Bay Restoration Funding, the Whole Watershed Act, et cetera. And then I turn it over to Secretary McElwain on the Conowingo questions.
Right, I appreciate the Conowingo questions. We are really happy to just continue to brag about this settlement because it took so long and it was a long time coming. The settlement is $340 million. That's $100 million than what we had before. We are still waiting on FERC for the licensing, for the final approval on the certification. Excuse me, but the funding is really going to help with restoration. $100 million of it is, well, $87 million of the money is going toward water quality projects. You have money going toward mussel restoration as well. And there's just a lot of different areas where this money is really going to make a huge difference. So we're really happy about that. We also have a modeling study that's going on that's really going to help us with understanding dredging and how the impact of dredging on behind the dam. And so we're excited about that as well.
When do you anticipate hearing back from FERC?
Next year.
Next year? And can you start doing anything until you get that, or you?
Yeah, work has already started. They're already cleaning up behind the dam and doing a lot of work. So yes, the work is going on right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Senator Lewis,
Not a question, just a comment. I love seeing Chesapeake Bay and agriculture at the same table. And I hear you that top-down doesn't work, but could use your help in repeating that model at the local level.
Certainly.
Thanks.
Appreciate that.
All right, any other questions? I think that's it. And we will see you all back for your individual agencies in the not-too-distant future.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have the Department of Planning is up next, and we have Elizabeth Weibel, who is the budget analyst, and we'll go through the department's analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The fiscal 2027 budget for the Department of Planning decreases slightly to just under $49 million. There are deficiencies in the budget totaling about $1.3 million for salary and fringe shortfalls, some maintenance needs at Jefferson Patterson Park and Museum, or JPPM, and to expend available federal grants. The allowance for fiscal 27 also includes continued funding for the Historical and Cultural Museum Assistance Program, which was funded in Section 21 of last year's budget bill. The spending breakdown is very similar to fiscal 2026, so I'll move ahead to page 5, Exhibit 3, which shows the proposed budget change. The allowance partially restores funding for the small commercial program of the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit. And there's also $250,000 for the African American Heritage Preservation Program's new non-capital grant program established by Chapter 622 of 2025. On page 6, there are a few items in the BRFA related to MDP. One would reduce the mandate for the small commercial program of the Historic Revitalization Tax Credit from $2 million to $500,000 annually. And the budget includes a funding reduction contingent on that provision. Another provision would expand the allowable uses of the Strategic Energy Investment Fund to include climate mitigation and resiliency efforts. In MDP's case, the budget proposes a fund swap contingent on the BRFA provision to use the seed funding for an existing climate resilience planner position. And DLS recommends amending the contingent language on those funds just to make it more specific to the BRFA provision as written. Then the third BRFA provision would add JPBM to the program open space funding formula, and this would give the park a percentage of transfer tax receipts or a minimum of $200,000 per year. It would probably be, with the transfer tax receipts, probably more like $300,000 to $400,000 per year. And that additional funding would support site operations and maintenance at the Maryland Archaeology Lab when that reopens. The key observations begin on page 8. The Historic Revitalization Tax Credit has 3 components, basically: the non-budgeted homeowner tax credit, and then 2 programs for commercial properties that receive mandated funding in the budget. The larger competitive commercial program was amended by last year's BRFA to temporarily reduce the mandated funding from $20 million to $16.5 million annually. The small commercial program currently receives a mandated appropriation of $2 million annually. Last year in fiscal 26, it received no appropriation because it had an existing fund balance that it could spend down. It closed, that account closed fiscal 2025 with a balance of about $2 million. And the BRFA provision would reduce mandated funding to $500,000 per year, which is more in line with the average demand for the program. On page 10, there's an update on the MD 250 Commission, which has a number of programs to prepare for the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States. They've been doing some outreach programs, including at some minor league baseball games, and they've also awarded more than $650,000 in grants for local programming. And in 2026, they're planning additional local grants, a traveling exhibit, a civics moonshot, and some other activities. And the commission receives level funding of $250,000 in the fiscal 27 allowance. On page 11, you'll see the DLS recommendation to modify the contingent language on the CEF appropriation. And that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions.
Are there any questions for Ms. Weibel? All right.
Good afternoon. Hello, Chair Heddleman and members of the committee. Good to be back here again and see you all. For the record, Rebecca Flora, Secretary, Maryland Department of Planning, and with me for any questions that you may have is Elizabeth Hughes, our Director of Maryland Historic Trust, and then a new face for you is Andrew Kelson, who's our Chief of Operations at MDP, who oversees all of our fiscal team. I just want to, we fully concur with the DSL recommendations, and we're really grateful for the partnership that we've had in all of that. We start with a very collaborative effort with DBM, and as we've worked back and forth through any questions that came up, I feel like it's been a very professional approach to team effort to ensure that we're doing the best we can to be fiscally responsible and address the budget challenges that we have. With that said, we are a lean agency, so sometimes there's not a lot of places to go, but we've done our best internally also to not only meet the requirements, but to also look for areas of efficiency through areas, for instance, where we've been able to kind of bring together some of our business units to make sure we're fully optimizing some of our highly skilled staff, particularly on our data team and our geospatial teams. We've also really taken on new duties despite, without somehow absorbing that. I'm grateful to my team that's been able to do that. Things like the Permitting Council that was created under executive order by the governor related to economic competitiveness. We were basically put in charge of that and have managed to make great progress on that. In addition to our own efforts around trying to advance sustainable growth in the state of Maryland. And then, of course, additionally, the Maryland Historic Trust, I continue to be amazed by the team and what they process there in the way of grants and tax credits and everything we can do to help not only honor our culture and our historic places, but then help revitalize communities. And in addition to that, I just really do want to highlight Maryland 250. It was just 3 years ago I was sitting here and a lot of questions. I think we have clearly proven out that with all of the early changes we made to that program and hiring of Michelle Johnson, establishing of the commission, we've made huge progress, and we're so excited about this year ahead of us, which will be across the entire year, across the entire state, and a lot of grassroots really leveraging existing programs and seeding a lot of activities there. So we're truly excited about how that has really come together over the last couple of years, getting us to this year. So that's, I wanted to give you a few highlights, but we're here to answer your questions and hear what's on your mind. Thank you.
Any questions? Senator Roosevelt?
Yes, sir. Hi. Good to see you. I wanted you to go back to the permitting initiative that you mentioned. I'm only vaguely aware of it, so can you give like a little bit longer version?
Absolutely. This was something, the executive order was issued in December of 2024, and it was specific to economic competitiveness, of which one of the sections of that was the formation of the Maryland Coordinated Permitting Review Council. Secretary of Planning is identified as the chair, and Maryland Department of Planning is identified as the administrator of that. In the course of really just a year, we've had huge progress. I mean, permitting, I'm sure you can appreciate, is an extremely complex embedded issue, but we can't ignore it any longer. We have to address the complexities of our permitting systems, not only, and starting first with our state agencies. So what we've been able to undertake essentially is what I like to call a discovery process, of really understanding what's happening in each of the state agencies. One of the biggest findings is that each and individually, the state agencies are doing everything they can to improve their systems. But what we don't have as a state is a horizontal approach. So we've also put together a prototype with the cooperation and partnership with Do It, a prototype dashboard that begins to, I like to think of it as envision the possibilities of where we could get to as a state with this dashboard and having essentially a tracking system for projects coming in. Now, these are place-based and infrastructure type projects, but we've been able to, through that process, establish the prototype, understand where the opportunities are, and at the same time, begun to really, the next stage right now, because our report on preliminary findings is due to the governor at the end of June, essentially July 1st of this year. We've already begun to put together the recommendations that we have found would really make a difference. There's technology solutions without a doubt, but we also need to have a user customer focus and lens on what's that experience and how do we make that experience easier and more efficient. So I've been living and breathing this because I had to sort of pretty much staff it personally. And so there's so much more we could share, but we'll also follow up and point you to the website and the dashboard and everything we've set up.
And that exists now?
It does exist now. Prototype for our pilot projects only.
I understand. Could I ask a couple more questions on this, Madam Chair? So what, does it only affect infrastructure and place-based projects?
We are focused on what I like to think of, I came from the developer world for a point in time, development type projects. So where there's bricks and mortar or horizontal development involved, to simply put it. The way it's stated in the executive order are place-based
I see.
or infrastructure type projects.
I see, so that's in the executive order, I see.
Exactly. So what it doesn't include are things like licensing and credentialing of people. That's over with labor and some of the work that they're doing with the governor's office.
Are they doing an equivalent thing with that sort of?
I wouldn't say equivalent, but they are definitely taking on what we like to think of as a modernization effort to really look at how all those systems are working and what we can do to improve them, make them more efficient.
What, if anything, have you learned in this initial process of how we do this stuff compared to other states?
We are definitely studying other states, particularly our neighbors. And the front runner, who has been very open sharing information with us, is Virginia. Virginia has started this process about, I don't know exactly, I think it was about at least 3 years ago. And they've been taking it on agency by agency, so they will ultimately have a fully coordinated effort. I think they're up to about 8 agencies in that coordinated system at this point in time. That's what we've been finding is that, the approaches are different. Virginia's the only one that's approaching it like we're planning to, depending on the recommendations and the governor's decision on that, where we have to have this holistic, more horizontal portal that someone can come into. Pennsylvania has been focused, is also undertaking this, as are many other states. There's just been, I've got a whole presentation, a briefing I just did to EEE last week of the specifics around some of that, and that'll be included in our report also. It really varies across the board, but everyone's struggling with this. Those, across the country, a lot of states are really refreshing and thinking about it. Part of the challenge is good intentions of additional layers, when you add those layers up, become overly burdensome. And what we're trying to do is sort through that. Our recommendations will come down to a sorting of categories between regulatory, things that we may not have all the answers in just 1 year, but regulatory type things.
Meaning regulatory changes?
Yes. So we may be back next year, or someone might be, based on that. Also process. We've learned that, where we've delegated authority, where it might be health or environment or others, the processes might be different on the ground. The guidelines might be different. How people actually implement on the ground is often different, creating the confusion in the developer community.
I don't understand what that means.
For instance, there's a county health department. Technically, they have to report back to the state. But the individuals on the ground, and this is the same in state agencies too, the individuals who are actually reviewing the permit, if there's not enough guidance, if there's not enough continuity in terms of how that's reviewed, you can end up with, dissimilarities in terms of experience across not only state systems, but also at the local level. So there's a lot of things in some respects that seem straightforward, but compiling it into this report, I think will help give us maybe a roadmap for where do we start. Because what I'm also looking at is how do we ensure, a lot of things that would be nice to do, but we won't be able to do it all. So how do we look at those recommendations that we think will have the most impact, and how do we phase this in over time? Because the technology solutions are definitely needed also, but we also need to, look at the regulatory, the process-oriented ones, and then just the system. How do we ensure accountability and feedback loops? So we're bucketing it into those categories for the report.
Great,
Probably
thank you.
more than you wanted to know, but
No,
pretty deep in
it's
it.
actually less than I wanted to know, but I don't want to take the committee's time.
Okay,
No,
happy to
it's
do
very
more.
helpful, thank you.
Thank you. And any other questions? Okay. I wanted to ask, the proposed efficiency, a chunk of that is federal grant funding, almost $700,000. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, I'm trying to make sure I know which part of the federal funds you're referring to. Was that the ones that were allocated to Maryland 250?
Does not say.
Oh,
The deficiency appropriation?
more than likely, if it's federal funds, I will turn to Director Hughes to address because,
The deficiency appropriation.
yes, that was related to some of the contingent for the federal funds, and Director Hughes is best positioned to answer that.
Yeah, well, there was a contingency because we were unsure if the historic preservation fund dollars that come from the federal government to support our work as the State Historic Preservation Office would be forthcoming. So we did receive a certain amount of money from the state's sort of rainy day fund to backfill what we thought was going to be a shortfall. In the end, that money was forthcoming, although somewhat delayed. So now we're going to be returning that contingency funding back, if I'm answering the right question.
Yeah, I think you are. But it's a mismatch of money. Maybe we can talk about it later. Or,
I can follow up.
okay. All right. All right. Well, we have a number of people who have signed up to testify. So we thank you for being here. And
Thank you all.
we will move now to public testimony. Each person who has signed up will have 2 minutes. And we'll start with, well, Ms. Hughes was up with you already. Lucille Walker, Southern Maryland Heritage Area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and committee, for letting me say a couple quick words today. For the record, I am the Executive Director of the Southern Maryland National Heritage Area, which is both a state and national heritage area. I am co-chair of the Maryland Heritage Areas Coalition, which includes all 13 heritage areas, which represent every county in Maryland and the city of Baltimore. I'm also a vice chair of Partners of Open Space, which is a really important group, organization that helps protect program open space and all the vital work that that program does for our state. So I wanted to start by thanking the governor for the level funding for the Maryland Heritage Area Program in the current budget. Maryland is special in many ways. One of the ways it's special is that we're the only one of 2 states in the nation with a state-based heritage area program. And that really shows what our values are. And so we thank the state of Maryland for that. It touches again on all 23 counties in the city of Baltimore. This program continues to be essential to the current and future growth of Maryland. And it's kind of unique, and the reason I'm here and speaking while planning is also speaking is that the Maryland Heritage Area Authority, which is the governing body, is technically under the governor's office, and some aspects of that are managed through planning and through MHT. It is not funded through the general fund. It is funded through a dedicated, restricted line in program open space, not part of the formula. It's a separate line. And so wanted to make sure that was clear. And of the $6 million that we get statewide, over $5.1 million goes directly back to our communities and counties, our projects, our towns. We have over $12 million in requests for grants this year alone for that $6 million in ability. So it's also, oh, I'm already up. I had so much to say. Thank you all so much for letting me speak today. And I'm joined by several of our Heritage Area directors here who are really interested in being able to be here today, from the Eastern Shore particularly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lindsay Baker, Maryland Humanities. Go ahead.
Hi, good
And
afternoon.
who came up with you?
Oh, yes, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Elizabeth Anderson Comer. I'm the president of the Catoctin Furnace Historical Society in Frederick County.
And I'm Alexandra Sinadis, and I'm the director of program at Maryland Humanities.
Are we okay if Elizabeth goes first? She was also
Sure.
signed up. Thank you.
Great. It's a great pleasure to be here today to provide testimony in support of the Maryland Humanities Fiscal Year 2027 request for their SHINE grant-making initiative. The Catoctin Furnace Historical Society is a 54-year-old volunteer organization that commemorates, studies, interprets, preserves, and shares the rich history of this revolutionary era industrial village, including its architecture, cultural landscapes, lifeways, foodways. Catoctin Furnace illustrates the hardworking furnace laborers, the enslaved Africans, the free African Americans, and the European immigrants who helped produce the iron ore and finished products used throughout the late 18th and early 19th centuries. And the lessons taught there are very important and cannot be lost to history. This year, our organization received $5,000 in grant funding from SHINE, and with this funding, we can stay open year-round. We provide access to the historic site then free of charge. And the SHINE money allowed us to provide employment to 2 Maryland Corps Service Year members. These are new jobs. They're employing young people and teaching them job and life skills as a stepping stone to becoming part of the skilled Maryland workforce in the future. And keeping our doors open around year-round with the SHINE grant funds also allows us to welcome an expected 5,000 visitors in 2026 and making a substantial impact, financial impact, economic impact in Maryland through heritage tourism and visitor revenue from both in-state and out-of-state visitors. But we understand intimately how scarce opportunities for general operating support are. We've greatly benefited from being a SHINE grant recipient. Most grants require the recipient to come up with the latest and greatest, which we always try to do, but the SHINE funds pay for day-to-day keep the lights on, serve the public expenses, many of which, such as payroll, electric, internet, and alarm, go right back into the coffers of Maryland residents and companies. So unrestricted funds such as the SHINE grant are a rarity, really a rarity, and operating support is so important to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I want to thank you all for allowing us to come and testify. My name is Lindsay Baker. I'm the CEO for Maryland Humanities. You all see me here year after year, and I'm a District 21 resident, so always happy to see Senator Rosa Pepp. To Lucille's point, Maryland is unique. We are the only state council that is providing general operating support for nonprofits through our grant program. We're one of 56 state and territorial humanities councils, and we're the only ones that are doing only that. We know that this program is important for providing funding for salaries and wages. In FY24, the funds were overwhelmingly used for that purpose. In FY25, what we've seen is, or FY26, sorry, getting mixed up, with the reductions in funds for this program from $1 million in FY25 to $250,000 in FY26, only 1 in 4 applicants were able to be funded. We know that over half of our applicants have budgets of $100,000 or less. So these are truly the community grassroots organizations in your districts, the ones that know you by name and will find you. Those are our grantees, and they find us and tell us how needed these funds are. And we have found in the years that we have funded it, we have been able to fund every single county and Baltimore City. So in FY25, we were able to fund 90 organizations with $10,000 in general operating support. In FY26, we were able to fund 30 organizations with $5,000 in general operating support. So that's why you see that 1 in 4 number of applicants to funded ratio. And so I just wanted to share highlights. I'm here talking to you all every year, and I'm ready for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions? No? Did you also want to say anything?
Alexandra is our Director of Programs and was ready to back me up with any questions I couldn't answer.
Great. Thank you. I understand. I mean, that must be very challenging to go from $1 million to 250, and I certainly understand the need that's out there. I have been to Catoctin site. I've been there many times, actually.
Everybody come.
If you look at our testimony that we submitted written, you'll see all the grantees in your counties.
Great.
Many in District 21, I just know because that's where I am.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bridget Carty? She has the flu. Okay. And Rod Cofield?
He's also sick today.
All right. I do not have anyone else on my list. Does anyone else want to say 2 minutes worth? No? All right. Well, thank you very much. Really appreciate it. I want to recognize Michelle Waxman Johnson for the I don't know the official name, Maryland 250. We're looking forward to celebrating and hearing, I know we have in the report some of the details of what is being funded through the program, so it's very exciting. All right, thank you very much for being here. And that will conclude the hearing.